Greetings from the Asian Productivity Secretariat Organization. Welcome to this APO's Productivity Talk, a series of discussion on the topics related to productivity. We are now broadcasting this talk live from Tokyo. Global production networks and its management are the engines that drive the economy's activities. A supply chain is a complex network through which a company and its suppliers produce and dispense products to their final customer. The COVID-19 pandemic has precipitated an unprecedented and sustained challenge to supply chains management around the globe. The decline and subsequent recovery in economic activity during the COVID-19 pandemic have been unprecedented, reflecting the massive shift in demand and supply triggered by the closing and reopening the economies. Disruptions brought by the global pandemic to supply chain has made global supply chains of today are becoming increasingly complex, amplifying the need for more innovative approach and sophisticated risk management. So in this P-Talk, we will share how to manage productivity through the application of supply chain risk management, practical framework and best practices on supply chain risk management, including know-how on supply chain resilience, will be highlighted. Some lessons learned in mitigating disruptions and uncertainty, as well as avoiding cost fluctuations through risk identification and assessment to ensure business continuity, will also be discussed. So to discuss further about this really timely topic, we are joined today from Tehran, Iran, by Dr. Ali Torabi. So good afternoon from Tokyo, Dr. Torabi. So we are so glad to have you here today with us in this talk.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in this PTAC. I'm also grateful for APO and National Iranian Productivity Organization for arrangement of this PTAC. My name is Ali Torabi. I'm currently a full professor of operations and supply chain management in the School of Industrial Engineering, University of Tehran.
So thank you for your presence in today's talk, Dr. Torabi. So Dr. Torabi is currently holding position as a full professor of operations and supply chain management in the School of Industrial Engineering, College of Engineering, University of Tehran in Iran. He is also the head of Research Center on Logistics and Supply Chain Management in the same university. He has authored and co-authored of more than 100 papers in prestigious journals such as Operation and Supply Chain Management and other academic journals in the field. He has been involved in more than 50 applied projects in industrial and service sectors in different areas of operation and supply chain management, such as supply chain planning, procurement management, process management, performance management, and etc. So before Dr. Torabi will start with his sharing, I would like to inform to all viewers here that today's session will be live and interactive. So I'm inviting viewers to leave comments and questions in the live chat below, so then we can have the discussion right after the presentation by Dr. Torabi. So with that, I would like to request Dr. Torabi to start with your sharing. Dr. Torabi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bano, for introducing me. As you may know, risk management in organizations have become a very important topic recently because of increasing trends in happening disruptive events all over the world. So it's my pleasure to deliver this PTAC on supply chain risk management, during which I will be exploring the fundamentals of supply chain risk management and supply chain resilience with a focus on COVID-19 pandemic as a current global supply chain risk. So as an overview, my presentation will include 7 items: an introduction to supply chain risks, impact of COVID-19 pandemic on supply chains, an introduction to supply chain risk management and impacts of supply chain risk management on productivity. Then I will discuss a practical framework for supply chain risk management, and then briefly introduce supply chain resilience and its relationship to supply chain risk management. And at the end of my talk, I briefly talk about new trends and new waves on supply chain risk management area. Okay, let's start with the meaning of risk. As you may know, risk is related to future uncertainty about deviation from expected outcomes in the form of potential adverse events. For example, we may face late delivery from suppliers, which is an deviation from our targeted delivery lead time, or we may face unacceptable quality level of received shipments, which is an deviation from our targeted quality level. So, as you may imagine, every business is exposed to different types of risk with different sources. And when a minor glitch occurs in a member of supply chain, it can affect other members of supply chain very fastly, which is called ripple effect in the supply chains. For example, we observed the closure of Chinese suppliers and seaports at the start of COVID-19, which caused several shutdowns in several industries in the downstream of different supply chains in Europe and other parts of the world. So, as you can see, we need a supply chain-wide view on supply chain risks when dealing potential threats and risks along a supply chain. It means that we need to identify and assess potential risk in all parts of a supply chain, including supply side risk, internal risk, as well as customer or demand risk. So there are several classification schemes for supply chain risk which can help us in identifying potential risk in our businesses. For example, Jutter classifies supply chain risk into the external risks, which includes environmental and demand risks, those risks which are not under control of an organization. We have also internal risks, which are within a firm's control, and also network-related risk from other members of supply chain, like supply risk. Another similar classification scheme categorizes supply chain risk into 4 categories, including supply side risks, process side risk, demand side risks, and infrastructure risk. For example, supply side risks can include late deliveries, as I said before, quality issues about shipments received from suppliers, and supplier disruption due to several reasons such as happening natural disasters. Process side risks refer to adverse events within the business processes like machine breakdowns. Also, demand side risks refers to adverse events at the downstream of supply chains, which may include delays in new product development or wrong forecasting leading to inventory risks. For example, in the current COVID-19, we observed very volatile customer demands and demand surges in some health-related and food items due to panic purchasing. And infrastructure risks is related to supporting systems of an organization, such as information systems, transportation, and financial systems. There is also another classification provided by Christopher Tang, who divides supply chain risk to operational and disruption risks. This classification is mostly applied in practice and academia. Notably, operational risks refer to relatively regular or business as usual events originated from inherent uncertainties in demand and supply sides. For example, quality problems, late deliveries, power outage. These events are frequent but with somehow low impact. Also, disruption risk refer to major disruption caused mainly by natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, and man-made activities like war, terrorism activities, and labor strikes. As you can see, such risks have low likelihood but medium to high impact, and such risks are in the focus of supply chain resilience and business continuity management systems. Apart from aforementioned classification, we have been facing pandemic-related disruptions during the last 2 years, which are differentiated from previous risk types as they have special characteristics. For example, pandemic-related disruptions have long-lasting effects with extensive scope and have rapid propagation with currently supply, demand, and process disruption in the supply chain networks. We also have observed volatile prices and demand due to panic purchasing during this pandemic. A recent survey shows that 94% of Fortune 1,000 companies were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the food and healthcare supply chains. For example, this table shows those areas impacted by COVID-19. For example, it impacted demand side where we observed demand surge for some health items like ventilators and face masks, as well as food items like meat, eggs, and dairy items. We also observed material shortages in healthcare industry due to closure of suppliers in result of lockdowns, while major food producers experienced sharp decline in demand from restaurants, hotels, major retailers, and cafes. We also observed impacts about financial and sustainability issues. For example, we observed reduced cash inflows due to facilities closures and threats to health and safety of workers. So, to cope with such supply chain risk, we must take enough attention to supply chain risk management issue. As you can see here, supply chain risk management deals with identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks along supply chains. It aims to understand risk and their effects and try to take proactive and preventive actions for mitigating identified risks. Sorry, I had some problems with switching between slides. Anyway, there are several reasons that make supply chain risk management a very important topic. As the first one, we are observing an increasing trend in disruptive events affecting supply chain adversely. Secondly, traditionally, supply chains has focused on implementing lean initiatives associated with little redundancy to make them cost efficient, which in turn makes supply chains very vulnerable to different risks. Also, global sourcing has made companies very dependent on their suppliers, and any glitch in their suppliers can stop their material flows. All of these issues are making supply chains more vulnerable. In this way, we can realize several impacts of supply chain risk management on productivity. By implementing a supply chain risk management framework, companies can ensure their production and distribution processes and other processes are functioning continuously. Supply chain risk management can avoid from profit losses due to sudden shutdowns by detecting risks early. Also, supply chain risk management can create ability to have quick response to unexpected events, and therefore it safeguards the image of the corporation. And in total, supply chain risk management can ensure supply chain business continuity, and it therefore strongly contributes to productivity by minimizing stops to different processes due to happening different disruptive events, which in turn can improve the productivity of organizations through minimizing possible losses to the businesses resulting from such stoppages. So there are several frameworks in the literature for supply chain risk management implementation. Among them, I can refer to ISO 28000 standard management system, which is a management system for security and resilience. NISTIR 7622, which is a framework for managing information security and privacy risks. There are also several frameworks developed by pioneer companies such as McKinsey Institute and Ericsson companies. Furthermore, several academics have developed more detailed and methodological approaches. Anyway, all of these frameworks fortunately involve similar steps, including risk identification, assessment, mitigation, and monitoring. In the first step, we should identify potential risk for which there are several qualitative and quantitative methods. For example, by looking at documented processes along the supply chain and using well-known supply chain business process frameworks like SCORE and Porter's value chain model, we can identify potential risk associated with several stages of a supply chain. We can also use SWOT analysis, which identifies weaknesses and threats as the source of several risks within an organization. And also we can use surveys conducted by well-known companies. For example, we can get good ideas about potential risk using the most cited supply chain risk provided by supply chain 247.com company. As you can see, the most cited supply chain risk according to this company includes suppliers issues and delivery disruptions, changes to national and local regulations, manpower-related concerns like truck drivers' strikes, competition among supply chains, general economic conditions like high inflation rates, which can affect the whole country and thus every supply chain working in the country, or fluctuation on raw material prices, and also security breaches. In the second steps of the supply chain risk management framework, we should rank potential risks through calculating a risk number for each risk factor, which is calculated by multiplication of likelihood and severity associated with each risk. Risk likelihood can be calculated by using past data and subjective judgments of experts, and severity of impact of each risk can be estimated by looking at lost revenue, its importance on customer satisfaction or brand management, and also data provided by some insurance companies about the most often claims. As you can see in the so-called risk metrics, supply chain risks are positioned into 4 quadrants according to their likelihood and impacts. Operational risks have low impact but can be expected to occur frequently. Also, disruption risks are mainly originated from natural and man-made disasters, have low probability but high impact. So using risk metrics, we can follow the Tang classification to classify supply chain risk into broad categories of operational and disruption risks. After risk assessment, we can use different response strategies to the risk positioned in different zones of risk metrics. For example, we can accept those risks with low likelihood and low impact. For example, absence of a non-critical worker can be accepted and we can do nothing for that. Or we should avoid or stop those risks with high likelihood and high impact. For example, stopping to produce a product which don't have a reasonable market anymore. Also, for those risks with low impact, high likelihood, we can use transfer strategy by ensuring or outsourcing some activities. Finally, for low likelihood but high impact risk, like natural disasters, we must mitigate the risk by reducing the probability or impact. Okay. Another emerging and relevant area to supply chain risk management is supply chain resilience. Supply chain resilience is defined as the capability of a supply chain to withstand, adapt, and recover from disruptions to meet customer demands. So when a disruption, so if we consider each supply chain risk as a virus threatening the supply chain, resilience can be viewed as our immune system. And when a disruption is happened, if we can come back to the normal operating level in a less time, we would be more resilient. So time to recovery and recovered operating level are two important factors in estimating the resilience level of an organization. Supply chain resilience capabilities include three dimensions, namely proactive capability, reactive, and network design quality. As the figure shows, proactive capabilities are provided in the preparedness and pre-disruption phase, and reactive capabilities are used in the post-disruption phase to respond to the disruptive event and recover from as quickly as possible. As you can see in this slide, flexibility, redundancy, fortification, and collaboration are the most applied proactive resilience capabilities. Flexibility enables a firm to respond to changes at the minimum time and cost through creating flexibility in facilities, for example, using flexible manufacturing system and cellular manufacturing system. We can also apply flexibility in transportation systems using multiple modes and multiple routes. And we can also offer flexibility in supplier side by using backup suppliers, for example, and also flexibility in workforce through cross-training. In addition, redundancy relates to intentionally considering extra capacity and inventory that can be used at post-disruption. Measure redundancy capabilities include backup suppliers, backup production capacity, and inventory pre-positioning. Furthermore, fortification examples include investment in reliability improvement of existing facilities, constructing flood wall to prevent flooding around the border of industrial zone in flood-prone areas, and also as an example to COVID-19 context, installing hand washing station and teaching employees to self-monitor their health in pandemic. Finally, collaboration can be achieved by, for example, information sharing between supply chain parties or inventory sharing between different distribution centers of a retail supply chain, for example, to avoid stock outs or excess inventory in different distribution centers. As the second line of defense in supply chain resilience, the reactive capability is defined as a system's ability to adapt immediately after a disruptive event to minimize its adverse impacts on supply chain performance. It includes response and recovery abilities, and supply chain redesign and direct shipping are two well-known reactive strategies. Finally, the third dimension of resilience is the network design quality, which is associated with the geographical dispersion of supply chain network facilities, which is usually assessed by three measures, including network density, network criticality, and network complexity. And finally, the unique nature of pandemics requires special resilience approaches to be in place, such as redesign production of emergency items like setting face masks or ventilators, keeping backup supplies at diversified locations, using nearshoring or local sourcing instead of offshoring, and also using online sales channels and home delivery. As the last note in this PTAC, we can see some trends in supply chain risk management, including applications of disruptive technologies or those technologies related to Industry 4, applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques in supply chain risk management, which leads to data-driven supply chain risk management framework, and an increasing trend of integration of lean and resilience paradigms. As an example to the first two trends, through IoT-enabled sensors, supply chains are now capable of gathering real-time data for their production and logistical processes, and accordingly, they can predict some potential malfunctions using machine learning techniques, which in turn can help supply chains to apply suitable risk responses on time. As another example, big data analytics can be used at the planning stage to identify suppliers' potential risks, such as late delivery, through analyzing the big data about the past performance of suppliers regarding delivery lead time, quality level, etc. So in this regard, data mining and data science technique can be used to gather, store, and analyze a diverse set of risk-related data from several data sources for detection and assessment of selected risks. In this regard, we are facing the term risk intelligence, which can be defined as an organization's ability to identify, measure, assess, and predict threats by using relevant past data and experience. And finally, integration of lean and resilience paradigms can lead to designing more resilient supply chain networks at reasonable costs through choosing a best set of resilience strategies with maximum synergistic effect at minimum cost. Thank you for patience, and I will be at your disposal for any question. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Dr. Torabi, for your presentation. We noted several interesting points, such as the lesson learned from the pandemic, and also the use of, you mentioned also, data, big data in managing the risk throughout the supply chains. So currently we are having 43 viewers, live viewers, watching and joining this talk. So they some of them, they post really good question. This is the first question that I would like you to respond, Dr. Torabi. The first question is coming from, I think, Mr. Surya Prakash Marandali. The question is about monitoring the supply chain risk management. Is it possible the monitoring can be done in real time? monitoring the supply chain risk management? Can we do it in real time? I mean, if there is certain particular risk in certain area of supply chain, can we really know it in real time? I think that's the question. Please provide your response on this, Dr. Torabi.
Yeah, I think this question relates to my last notes on the new trends on supply chain risk management. I think using real-time data generated by IoT-enabled sensors, we can trend the last recent status of processes, and based on this real-time data, we can predict what is happening in the near future. So I think using those technologies offered in the industry for example, IoT-enabled sensors and using big data analytics methods, we can monitor several issues and predict several upcoming risks, and can better respond to them very fast. Yeah.
So thank you for that, Dr. Torabi. This is another question coming from one of our viewers, still related with the use of data. Mr. Amit Kumar, he's asking about how can digital twin technology can be used to leverage or to maintain supply chain management.
Yeah, as far as I know about digital twins in supply chains, we may construct a digital twin of our supply chain using current technologies such as simulation optimization models to monitor our processes in real time and predict some upcoming events. And so having a digital twins for our whole supply chain can help us in predicting upcoming risk in the supply chain as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you once again for that. I think it may be better to have more elaboration about that. Perhaps like visual demonstration. Perhaps we can do that in the next round of productivity talk on this particular and interesting topic. So I would like to move on with the next question. This is a question related to pandemic, basically. So how has the pandemic taught us about the supplier strategy? We've heard the story that some of the companies, they need to diversify their supplier because certain bottleneck. We know that certain region is actually having problem in supplying the requested inputs for certain industrial sector. How this can be done in the how companies can diversify risk across their supply chain networks, particularly in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah, as I said in one of my slides about pandemic, regarding supplier strategies, pandemic taught us to follow multiple sourcing by choosing several main and also backup suppliers from different locations. And also it emphasizes on nearshoring instead of offshoring, because offshoring enforce some global risks to the supply chains. So using domestic production and domestic suppliers can reduce our risks to different supply chain risks. These are some lessons learned from pandemic recently regarding appropriate strategies for implementing about coping with supply chain risks.
Okay, so the next question, this is still related to the pandemic, actually, but it is more on the regulation side of supply chains. So there has been so many disruptions because of the pandemic, of course, on certain area of supply chains. Let's say for critical goods such as food. So perhaps one can easily predict or expect that government may push for more regulations in the supply chain of that particular or critical goods. So do you think that this prediction is true? If it is true, then how should the company need to deal with this? Dr. Torabi.
Sorry, could you please your question?
Yeah, I think the disruptions brought by the pandemic may push the government to
Yeah.
to regulate more on certain area of supply chain, such as for critical goods such as food, for example, to reduce the risk of having inflation, for example. So I think this is one of the prediction that or perhaps lesson learned, or perhaps something that we need to anticipate in the post-pandemic world. If this prediction is true, how should the company need to deal with this?
Yeah, this is a challenging question. Yeah.
One of the of
I'm
course,
thinking actually.
yeah, please take your time with that. So and move on to the next question.
Maybe we should go to the next question and
Right, I think
maybe
that's fine. That's fine. We can revisit the question later and also the answer to that. Okay, the next question is basically about recently as the anticipation of the increasing uncertainty during the pandemic, we saw some of the companies they tend to stockpile the inventory, of course, as a reaction, as a logical reaction to the uncertainties, because perhaps they don't know when their inputs or materials will be arriving at their storage, those kind of thing. So there has been a recent trend on this that we can see still happening perhaps until these days. So then I think this kind of a practice may give pressure to cash flow management, of course, logically, because the company they need to put more money into acquiring more and more inventories, then they would have less and less money for some other activities. Okay, so then perhaps I mean the question here that we like to have from you is that how can we put the right balance between inventory management and cash flow or cost management in this kind of situation?
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, inventory pre-positioning or stockpiling inventory is one of mostly applied redundancy strategies. However, we can also benefit from other redundancy capabilities, for example, by choosing backup suppliers and backup production capacities. And also we can make suitable contractual agreement with our main and backup suppliers. For example, using well-known supply contracts like option contracts and quantity flexibility contracts, or even a mixture of these supply contracts schemes. In this way, we can use less from inventory pre-positioning and can benefit from such supply contracts and can lower the pre-positioned inventory level at a reasonable cost.
All right. So one thing that we can apply is you mentioned about the option contract in managing the inventory. I think this is something that is also happening and then increasing in terms of being exercised in various companies across sectors. All right, thank you for that, Dr. Torabi. And this is my next question. This is kind of I would say, the second batch of the question that I would like to pose to you. Is mostly related to the SMEs in dealing with supply chain risk management. So as we know that SMEs are often the weakest actors in the supply chain networks, although their exposure toward risk itself perhaps is actually at the same magnitude as their larger counterpart or large company. So has there been any major changes in the supply chain risk management for SMEs due to pandemic? And how will the SMEs, this is the second sort of follow-up question, how will SMEs need to manage the ever increasing risk in their supply chains in the post-pandemic world? So please guide us with this question, Dr. Torabi.
Yeah. As we know, SMEs are a vital component in the economic development of every country. But as we know, they have several issues regarding their small sizes, short capitals, and their reliance on support from government. So I think the main problem of SMEs is that there is lack of enough knowledge in the application of supply chain management and especially supply chain risk management approaches and techniques. So maybe governments should plan to empower SMEs by conducting special workshops and helping them in conducting supply chain risk management initiatives, I think.
Thank you for that insight and response. My next question is going to be about the risk that coming from human capital. So as we can see that because of the pandemic, many of the tasks needed to be performed remotely. And we have seen also the scarcity of labor across sectors. Of course, some of them, they don't really have choice to work from home and to do their tasks remotely. So how then the supply chain managers need to deal with this kind of issue coming from the labor, the labor of scarcity? Of course, we can see that there is this increasing risk because less and less people is actually performing the jobs or the task. So this is another kind of risk that can potentially be disrupting the supply chain. So how do the company or the SMEs in this case can handle this kind of situation? Dr. Torabi, please.
I think the labor scarcity coming from remote working setting currently using by different companies, I think one of main solutions can be adopting cross-training programs to make the employees multi-skilled workers. And in this way, the company can have more flexibility about assigning their employees to different processes. And when some key employees are absent due to problems caused by pandemic, other employees can do their jobs, and in this way, yeah, I think cross training may be a good solution for this.
That I think you are saying that investment in human capital in terms of training, in terms of increasing their skill, including their knowledge about the pandemic, about the hazard related to their job is important. This is one of the things that we companies or SMEs can do in that in dealing with this particular matter. The next question is about the adoption, or I would say the implementation of supply chain risk management for SMEs. I think we know that supply chain risk management is both costly and time consuming, particularly from the perspective of SME, despite its potential and positive impact on the company performance. I think we know that. So how can we incite more and more SMEs to embrace or to adopt this supply chain risk management by knowing the fact that it's costly, it's time consuming? So your advice on this, Dr. Torabi?
As I said in your similar questions, I think as SMEs have typically short capital and low knowledge in SCM and supply chain risk management. So as I said before, I think governments should set up some practical workshops on supply chain management, supply chain risk management topics to help to enhance SMEs' knowledge about these topics, and also help them in conducting such initiatives within SMEs. Something similar to supplier development plans, which we have in supplier relationship management area. I think governments can help in this way SMEs, and also SMEs should use more consultancy service from private sectors to enhance their knowledge about supply chain risk management and enabling them to implement such initiatives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that insight on what SMEs needs to do in embracing supply chain risk management. My next question is about, now we have experienced all the sufferings, all the challenges related to pandemic. Now let's move toward perhaps near future. What's going to happen? One thing that we can know is going to happen is the rebound of the economy activities, and then of course behind that is the rebound of the supply chain coming back perhaps to their normal kind of activities. Even though it's still dark, how are we going to define normalcy in that particular situation post pandemic? So my question is actually related: what should company need to prepare for the rebound of the supply chain disruptions, so then they can capture larger share of pent up demand, and perhaps at the same time they can solidify their relationship with their most important customers? I think when the economy is rebounding or is about to rebound, when the company can really anticipate this, then it's also actually an opportunity for them to grow. So in regard to supply chain risk management or supply chain management itself, what is it the best thing that the company can do in these kind of situations, Dr. Torabi?
Yeah, totally. I feel companies should make them more resilient against different sources of supply chain risk that they have identified during their risk identification and assessment phases. So I think they can implement business continuity management systems to keep themselves competitive enough when disruptive events happen, so they can be operative and save their market share in disruptive situations. So planning and conducting supply chain risk management plans, especially implementing business continuity management systems or other risk management standard systems, can obviously help organizations to make them more resilient against different sources of disruptions. So this is the main maybe initiatives that companies can think about it.
So the next question is going to be the last of the last question that I have on my list, which also going to mark the end of this really interesting topic with you, Dr. Torabi. So the question is actually about, there is this now an emerging supply chain model. Particularly, it was precipitated by the pandemic. So the model, I mean, so many different model that people give, people name on this new model. I mean, in most of the references that I gather, they call it digital supply network, which actually, a supply chain that can be, empowered by the advances in information and communication technology. Perhaps this is not really happening in most places of the world, but it may be the future of supply chains. So then, what do you think about this new model? Can you explain it a bit? Where is it, or how is it the role of supply chain risk management in this new digital supply network model, Dr. Torabi?
Yeah, I think your questions backs to my last comments during my presentation about the new trends in supply chain risk management. As I said in my talk, one of the new trends in supply chain risk management is increasing trend of applying disruptive technologies such as IoT, blockchains, big data analytics, and so on. So in addition to this trend, we are observing applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques in supply chain risk management, which can lead to designing data-driven supply chain risk management, I think. So these technologies and techniques, I think, can be used to gather, store, analyze a diverse set of risk-related data, which can be used for detection and assessment of selected risk. And as I said before, we are facing with the new term risk intelligence. So I think the advent of such new technologies can enhance supply chain risk management through introducing intelligence to risk management processes. And so we should learn more about such new technologies, and also areas related to data science and we should need to learn more about how data science techniques and industry for technologies can contribute to enhancing the supply chain risk management. Yeah.
So your response about the probable future of supply chain risk management is marking the end of this P talk, this productivity talk. So before we end the session right here, we would like you to perhaps to summarize, to give conclusion in 3-4 lines or sentences, so then the viewers can have something to take away, to learn from this session. So Dr. Torabi, your conclusion or your summary of this session.
Yeah. Thank you. Actually, in this PTAC, we explain supply chain risks, their different classifications, which can help us in identifying potential risk to our businesses. And we talked about supply chain risk management and its contribution to productivity, and also explained the framework for doing main steps of supply chain risk management, including risk identification and risk assessment and risk response. We also talked about supply chain resilience, its relationship to supply chain risk management and its main dimension, with several examples about each dimension. So as a final note, I should say we need to take enough attention on supply chain risk management and supply chain resilience to ensure our businesses have suitable proactive and reactive plans to cope with different risks that potentially can threat our organizations. Such proactive and reactive plans can surely improve our productivity through minimizing possible losses to our businesses. So in this way, we need to more focus on supply chain risk management in organizations and invest more on this very important topic and learn about the lessons we had from recent pandemic. And yeah, this is my final note. Thank you.
So with that, I would like to express our gratitude to you, Dr. Ali Torabi, for your sharing and sharing your experience and also your time you spend with us. I would also like to thank the viewers for their engagement, for coming up with the question and comments, and for joining the sessions. If you still have comments and questions on this particular topic, please leave them on our YouTube channel, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we could with our response. I'm sure that Dr. Torabi will be very happy to provide us with the answer to your question or comments. So if you also would like to receive update on the future P-Talk and any other updates related to APO, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. So with that, I will see you in next APO Productivity Talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.